Hi, I'm Tyler London, Chief Analyst of Cabot Small Cap Confidential and Cabot Early Opportunities here with your Cabot Weekly Review. It is Friday, July 18th, just after 12 o'clock noon Eastern Time. And as you can see, S&P 500 here is pretty much dead flat on the day. We did hit a new all-time high yesterday, also multiple new all-time highs on the NASDAQ. We did not hit a new all-time high or even come close on the small cap index. We did okay last week. There was a new multi-month high in the S&P 600, but things fell back this week, and hopefully we can see some more momentum pick up as we get into earnings season in the next, say, 2 to 3 weeks out for small caps is really when that action should pick up. All right, a lot of big macro news this week. So step back to the tariffs. Of course, Trump has reignited the whole tariff war discussion with August 1 now being the apparent deadline. It's kind of hard to make a call on how this is going to all shake out. You would think on the one hand, Trump would want to settle trade deals and just move on. On the other hand, there's been a lot of threats and talk of securing great deals for the U.S., so it seems like he really does need to come through with some deals that are legitimately better for the U.S. and that are going to be covered that way in the media. Of course, we don't know how it's all going to shake out. So we can only speculate, which we're not going to spend any more time doing today, but definitely a risk as far as tariffs go for the coming weeks. On Powell, it would seem that Trump would have a lot more control over this. Personally, I think that any talk of firing Powell is just ridiculous and crazy. Whether or not the Trump administration and Trump thinks that he's too late and he has screwed things up, it's just a horrible, horrible look for the administration if Powell were to be fired. We do need Fed independence. The market does not like it whenever there's a hint of messing with that. And I think to try to use the Fed headquarters, the renovation cost overruns there as cause just seems like the mother of all witch hunts. So hopefully that can just be out of the news cycle and let's move on. Inflation, we had the CPI and PPI inflation numbers this week. Not really any big picture cause for concern there, but there was definitely a little bit of an uptick in the core services inflation rate, maybe a little bit of a downtick in services. Big picture, it might just be that the tariffs are keeping inflation from moving closer to the Fed's target while not necessarily igniting a new round of inflation. We're going to learn more in a couple of weeks when the PCED data comes out. Talk more about that in just a second. But let's swap over and talk about the Fed. There was a lot of Fed speak this week. Midweek, we heard from a couple of governors talking about how tariffs could have more of an impact in the coming months, so should be patient. But then later in the week, we heard it from a few others talking about signs of weakness in the labor market. And then Daly was out talking about how the Fed shouldn't wait too long and said it's still reasonable to see 2 cuts this month. This year. Next week, going to be light for Fed speakers with the notable exception of Fed Chair Powell, who's going to talk on Tuesday. We do have a number of other data releases for the economy next week. Nothing that I think is super exciting. There's some manufacturing data, some home sales data, durable goods orders. But things really do get more interesting, I think, for most of us the week after next week. Like I said, we have the PCE price index, which includes imports, coming out on July 31st. Now, interestingly, that is the day after the July Fed meeting wraps up. I think they should have flipped those in the schedule, but, who am I to say? The PCE inflation rate for May was 2.3%. That's still above the Fed's 2% target. The Cleveland Fed predicts that the June reading will be up to 2.5%, so moving in the wrong direction. We'll just have to see. But that's one of the reasons why the market is really not factoring in any chance of a rate cut in July. The Fed just needs more time. They're going to get until September 17th because there is not a meeting in August. And market odds are currently 53% of a rate cut in September. So let's move on to stocks. I have 3 stocks to look at today, and they're all relatively strong. And then we have a 4th ultra speculative one that I think just might be kind of interesting to talk about for a second. So, but first, let's move on to the first name. So this is Sport Trader. Ticker symbol is SRAD. Market cap is about $10 billion. So this is a Switzerland-based sports technology company. They have a platform that integrates sports media and betting, and it's used by consumers, media groups, sports betting operators, and sports federations. As you would expect, they have partnerships with all the big professional sports organizations, so like the NHL, MLB, NBA, NASCAR, FIFA. In the fourth quarter of this year, the company is expected to close on this acquisition of IMG Arena, and they had a global sports betting rights portfolio owned by the Endeavor Group. The EDR is the ticker symbol there. Had that acquisition been closed at the beginning of this year, it would have added around 20% top line to Sport Trader. So definitely a meaningful acquisition. Another interesting aspect of the company is that management has said they really have a lot of forward visibility into what their revenue is. So we're not going to get into the weeds of the business, but it's one of the reasons I think that you see a relatively stable stock chart out of a company like this. All right, we'll move on to Sterling Infrastructure. Of course, there's a lot of talk about infrastructure with data centers and all of that. Sterling plays right into that. The ticker symbol here is STRL, market cap of about 7.6 billion. They are construction and engineering, specializing in infrastructure across data centers and manufacturing plants. But they also play in the residential and commercial building markets and in transportation. The company has been looking to add exposure to electrical and mechanical services for its e-infrastructure segment, and the stock has acted well since the announced acquisition of CEC Facilities Group. So this is a non-union electrical contractor based in Texas. They specialize in electrical and mechanical contracting. 80% of revenue tied to semiconductors, data centers, and manufacturing. So there's some optimism about how that's going to help Sterling, which has been looking to add exposure in that area. The big picture is, Sterling competes with other large players like Quanta. Ticker symbol is PWR, and MCOR. Ticker symbol is EMR. Both of those stocks have also performed well lately, but potentially CEC Facilities Group acquisition will help Sterling Infrastructure grow into a much bigger company, well above a market cap of 7.6 billion. Okay, we'll move on to Perimeter Solutions. Now, if you want to just stay well away from tariffs and everything else macro, Sterling might be one way. Perimeter might be one way to do that. The company makes and sells firefighting chemicals and additives for the oil market. So two business lines, two business segments. About 80% of revenue comes from the fire and safety retardants segment, while the other 22% comes from specialty products. That includes the oil additives and then also this growing printed circuit board business, PCB business. Now, interestingly, while the stock, I think, is acting well because we're getting into peak firefighting time of the year, and that's certainly a big part of why somebody would want to own this stock. And if you look at last year, Perimeter Solutions ran well into the fall. The stock ran well into the fall. So if you were thinking that this is like a seasonal play, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that that is winding down, because if you base it on last year, still a couple of months for the stock to run, just looking at that aspect. Now, looking internal to the business, this printed circuit board business I think is interesting. The company has been looking to add on acquisitions. They're trying to grow through acquisitions, but specifically in this PCB area, they are trying to tap more into communications infrastructure, energy infrastructure, defense, and industrial systems. And so they've just added another bolt-on acquisition to help build that business. If we step back to the fire and safety retardants business, the company just added a large fire retardant production facility in California, which it says is going to act as something of a hub to produce and distribute those materials to any airbase in North America within just a few hours. So some interesting things going on. When you start to look at the financials, if you just look quickly, revenue growth is expected to be in the single digits this year. So it's not like the most exciting growth story, but it is one of those names that I think it's worth a closer look. If any of what I just said sounds interesting. If not, perhaps you want something more speculative. So this is definitely not a recommendation, but it's kind of an interesting story. Sharlink Gaming, it's a small cap. Market cap here is 2.2 billion. Ticker symbol is SBET. Definitely not a recommendation, but the stock has been on fire after management came out saying that it would adopt Ethereum as its primary treasury reserve assets. Of course, most companies are holding like treasuries or CDs or something ultra conservative. So changing that to something like Ethereum obviously gives a company much more exposure to what's happening in the crypto markets. Now, this week, management of Sharlink came out and said it has become the world's largest corporate holder of the Ether cryptocurrency. So, if you're interested in that, check out Sharlink. If you're not, hopefully Perimeter Solutions, Sterling, or Sport Trader is more up your alley. Okay, guys, again, those weren't recommendations. Just trying to put some names on your radar that I find interesting, and hopefully you do as well. And that's it for this week. Hope you have a nice weekend, and we will be back in touch soon. Take care.